Hi, everybody. It's Tamara from Moogly, and I want to welcome you to today's live. Today, we are doing a live demonstration of how to crochet the Bird's Nest Bowl Set, which is a free pattern you'll find, of course, on mooglyblog.com, one I designed all the way back in 2012. So, of course, back then, I wasn't making pattern tutorials. I thought we'd revisit this one and give it its own tutorial today. This is a really simple set of bowls. Now I have just one right here because I made these back in 2012. Those bowls have long disappeared into my children's rooms, but it's just a great set of simple nesting containers that you can make using any super bulky weight yarn. Today I will be using Bernat Blanket, one of my faves. Comes in lots of forms, like 99 colors, plus all the ogos and the ombres and all the other beautiful colors out there. So it's a really great yarn to use for this project. Since we are live, I'm going to take just a moment here and hit refresh on my YouTube page so that I can follow along and answer any questions you guys might have as we go along here, live with our tutorial today. So, okay, it looks like we're up and running. So, all right, got it. Thank you. Tons of little pop-ups. Thanks so much, YouTube. All right, we're up and running. So if you are watching, please do hit that thumbs up button. Let YouTube know that we're live and rolling today so they can show it to other people as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's switch on over to the hand camera and we'll take a look at the pattern we're making today. All righty. So here you can see this is our Bird's Nest Bowl Set. This is a little PDF I printed out of the pattern for myself to follow along with today. As I can say, these were back in 2012. And you can see how the different sizes in this pattern all nest together really well. I originally wrote this pattern up in these 3 sizes, and then I had a request for an even larger size. So the instructions do include one size up from this as well. And to make all 3, might be a little bit more then to make that 4th one, I did originally use 150 yards of super bulky yarn, and you can use either a 9mm crochet hook or an 8mm crochet hook, just depending on what you need to get a nice stiff fabric. With the Bernat Blanket right here again that I'm using today, I did use an 8mm crochet hook. This one is by Susan Bates, and you can see this little basket right here. It is the smaller size, but all of them stand up really well on their own, just like this. You can see it's a little short, so that's, really great for notions, scissors. I keep all kinds of things in little containers like this, but it's stiff enough to stand up on its own. It doesn't have any stiffening agents. It isn't double walled or anything like that, which is a trick I like to use for my bigger baskets, but it's just a really great simple size with just a little bit of texture along the side to keep it interesting. There's one other trick for this pattern that you'll see. We work it and then we do one turn, so we always have the right side facing us that we see from the outside and the inside of the basket. So let me go ahead and set this one aside. I'm going to pull up another color here, a little bit darker, so it'll be a little bit easier to see against our white background. I'm just using some leftover bits of Bernat Blanket that I had laying around. This is a great pattern for stash busting if you want to do that, or of course you can pick up colors to match your decor. It also makes a wonderful gift set. If you know someone who's moved into a new home or apartment, or just needs a little pick-me-up. So let's go ahead and make the small bowl together. Each one of the sizes, let's take another look at these real here. Each one of these sizes just builds off the previous one. So as you move up a size, you've got one more round for the base, and then maybe another round for the sides. And then just it keeps building up like this. On the second page of the PDF, you can see how each size gets just a little bit bigger around and just a little bit taller, making it a really handy set. So as I say, today we're going to be making the smallest size, which all the other sizes build right on off of. So to make this pattern, we start with a magic circle. So we want to come in about 6 to 8 inches or so on our yarn here from the end. It is a super bulky yarn, so we want to come in a little bit further than we might with a thinner yarn. And then to make my magic circle, I like to yarn over twice on the first finger of my non-hook hand towards me. So let's do that one more time. Once and twice, just like that. You can see the little tail hanging out right there. So then, to begin crocheting into this ring, I'm going to stick my hook under both of those loops around my finger there. You can see the hook grabs that one furthest back, and I'm just going to pull it under the edge of the one in front. You can see I've got that secured between my fingers. Then I will yarn over and pull basically a slip stitch through. This really helps lock that ring together. I'm not going to count it as a stitch or as a chain one or anything. It's just holding my ring together really nicely. From there, we can begin with our crocheting. We're going to start with a chain one and then work 9 half double crochets right into this circle. So when I do that, I want to make sure, excuse me, that I go under that tail end as well as the circle that's around my finger. And I'll just do that here for our first stitch, and then I'll be able to take my finger on out of there. There we go. Didn't even finish pulling it through, but I know that now my circle is going to stay nicely open. At this point, you can close it up a little bit if you want to, but we can just keep working our stitches right into the circle. And again, every time we work into this ring, we want to make sure that that tail end is also laying over our hook so that it gets trapped inside those stitches. So there's 2, and we want to have a total of 9. Excuse me. So if you are joining us today, welcome. If you're here live, if you're watching later, welcome as well. Do let us know what you're working on today. We're doing this live, excuse me, at noon my time. So I hope you're all having a wonderful lunch. We're just doing a live video tutorial here for the Bird's Nest Bowl set. You'll find the link to this in the video description. Or you can simply Google or search Moogly Bird's Nest Bowl set. So let me see how many stitches I've got here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like I need 1 more. There we are. Again, want to make sure every time I go into that ring, but I also keep that tail right on top of my hook so that it's completely enclosed. Now we've worked all our stitches for this round. Before I join with a slip stitch, I do want to really gently pull on that tail end and close up that ring. When I do that, I kind of like to secure it with my other hand, which makes it kind of hard to see, I know, but you can see it's pulling in there. There we go. With this yarn, it will snap if you pull too hard on it. Most yarns will. So we just want to make sure to pull really gently to close up that ring. Then, when you're all done and you go to weave in your ends, make sure when you take your needle and weave in this end, you weave back and forth in a couple different directions, and that magic circle will stay closed for you. But let's come back here to the right side and finish up round 1. We've got our 9 stitches, so we just go into that first one there and join with a slip stitch. There we are. So round 1, we have 9 half double crochets, and we've got our little circle start to our basket here. For the next few rounds, we're going to continue working in what is considered basically a flat circle with your standard increases. So if you've never made a flat circle in crochet before, this is a great first project that kind of teaches you the formula. Doesn't matter what stitch you start with, you can start with any kind of stitch, but then your second round, you're going to double it. So to do that here, we're going to chain 1 and then half double crochet twice in each stitch around. So 2 half double crochets in each stitch. So we started with 9 in round 1, and at the end of round 2 here, we'll have 18. So I've got my first 2 made right there, right in that first stitch. And I'm going to continue to do that all the way around, working 2 half double crochets in each stitch of my circle. As I said, today I'm just using a little bit of leftover Bernat blanket from another project. You can use Bernat blanket. It is a wonderful, super bulky yarn for this project. With an 8mm hook, I find that it stands up really nicely and has just the right amount of sort of stiffness or body to it for a project like this. 8mm is also my favorite hook size to use with this yarn when I make the Moogly squish patterns that you may have seen here on the YouTube channel or on the blog previously. So I'm just continuing to work around. You can see by working 2 half double crochets in each stitch of the previous round, that's, excuse me, it's making a really nice flat circle for us. Hi, Jan. Thanks so much for tuning in live. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, guys. All right, we're just continuing on around with 2 half double crochets in each stitch. Now, you do want to keep track because we are slip stitching at the end of every round here. It's very easy to accidentally mistake a slip stitch for a stitch. So if you'd like, you can use a stitch marker in the first and last stitch of each round to help mark you out, to help mark which those stitches are, so you know that that's a slip stitch in between. Or of course, you can go back and count. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So that one is definitely a slip stitch. So let me go ahead. I'm going to pull up my stitch markers here. And let's start using some stitch markers to help us keep track. I'm going to put one in the last stitch of the round now that I've made it. And after I've joined my slip stitch here and chained one and made my next stitch, I'll mark the first stitch of the next round. So let's go right into that first stitch we made here. And that is what it should look like at the end of round 2. Round 3, we're going to continue making our flat circles right following that flat circle formula. Continuing making our bird's nest bowl in the smallest size, but again, all the sizes start out with these same first few rounds. We're just adding on every time. So for round 3, we're going to start with a chain 1, and then half double crochet right in that first stitch. Now, because it's the first stitch of the round, let's go ahead and put our stitch marker right there, and it'll make it that much easier when we come back around. Oh, let me try a different one there. Every once in a while, I'll have one snap on me. There we go. They do last a little bit longer if you store them open. You don't want to store them closed, but every once in a while, plastic will break. So we'll pull up a little bit more yarn here as we continue on with round 3 of our bird's nest bowl set. So we work a half double crochet in the first stitch, then 2 half double crochets in the stitch after that, and that's our repeat. So our first round was however many stitches we need for the stitch we're making. Half double crochets, 9 is a really good number. To keep that flat circle going, the second round we work 2 stitches in each stitch. For the third round, we now need to spread our increases out. We have 1, then 2, 1, then 2. So we've got 1 here. So let's continue on around. We're going to put 2 in the next one. So we can start seeing sort of the formula here. We had 9 stitches in our first round, 18 stitches in our second round, and our third round will have 27. So whatever number we started with, we're going to increase by that number in every round. So we've got 1, then 2, 1. Now we need 2 in the next. So if you get some experience making flat circles, and really kind of pay attention to the way the pattern works, you'll see that there really is kind of a mathematical formula to crocheting a flat circle. And again, no matter what stitch you're using, this is kind of how it usually goes. You're going to increase by the number you started with in every round. So we've got 2, then 1, 2 in the next. All right, 1 and 2. There we are. Oh, Jan, you break your stitch markers all the time too. Me too. I tell you what, I've started buying them in bulk. I even got 4 packages of them in my Christmas stocking from my mom this year, which was pretty cool. All right, so 2 and then 1, 2 and then 1, all the way around. So again, we started with 9, then 18 in the second round. We'll have 27 in the third round, increasing by the number we started with. Some people prefer to start their rounds with half double crochet with 10 stitches in the first round. Sometimes I do that too if I need a certain stitch multiple for a stitch pattern that's coming up later. Maybe I'm making a hat that requires a certain number of stitches. So 10 is a perfectly good number that works with half double crochet a lot too. And if you started with 10, then in your second round you would have 20. And in your third round you would have 30. That's one of the ways I've made the squishes, I believe. So it really depends on your personal preference, but the formula itself, again, doesn't matter what kind of stitch it is. If it was double crochets, I might have started with 12, and then it would be 24, and then what comes after that, 36, 48, on through. But that is basically the formula for making a flat circle. So if you're new to crochet, that is my little tip there. As you make flat circles, as you make projects in the round, really sort of pay attention to that formula, and you'll see yourself just how easy it is to crochet a flat circle. So I'm working into that last stitch there. It's my stitch marker. I know I've come to the right spot. I've got 2 stitches right in that stitch. And I can go ahead now and move that stitch marker right on up to the last stitch of this round. I want to get it under both of those loops there. There we go. So you can see it's still flat. Now it's a little bit wobbly, especially with this really thick yarn. I need to pull that center a little bit tighter. And when I weave my ends in, I'll pull that in a little bit more. If you find that you're getting a lot of cupping, you can try adding a couple extra stitches, but you also want to make sure that every time you finish a stitch, you pull up a little bit on that loop, especially when we've got a fuzzy yarn like this where it kind of likes to grip onto itself. We want to make sure that the tops of our stitches aren't real shrunken. We want to make sure they're the same size as the rest of our loops. So with that, we can go ahead and finish round 3 here and join with a slip stitch to that first marked stitch. There, you can see right there how handy those stitch markers are as we come around, because that slip stitch wants to look like a stitch, but we know we're going to skip it because we've got that first and last stitch marked. Alrighty. Oh, thank you so much, Dragonfly and Jan. Thank you so much. All right. Jan had a great question. Why do we sometimes connect with a slip stitch and sometimes not? Well, it's just two different ways of making a circle. When we join with a slip stitch, you can see at the end of every round how it's just nice and perfectly round like this. When we work in a spiral, as we come back around, there's going to be a little bit of a jog there. Now, the great thing about a spiral is it avoids any seams. In this yarn, it's pretty hard to see those seams, but in the yarns where you have a lot of stitch definition, that seam can really stand out from all those slip stitch joins. So when you work in a spiral, it avoids those slip stitch joins. You've got just one continuous row. You're not going to see a seam anywhere, but as you come around, you're going to have a little bit of a jog that you have to deal with. So it sort of transfers the look of those seams to the outside of the project, to that final round. Now, there are really great reasons to work in that spiral. Maybe you need that look. Amigurumi, for instance, and the Moogly squishes often use a spiral instead, because when we get to the end, we're sewing different pieces together, and any funny little jog there is going to be hidden. And again, it avoids that whole seam right there. So that was a great question, Jan. Thank you so much for asking. All right, so for our small size bowl here, just double checking, we've got one more round that we work flat, so we can continue on working this nice flat circle. Hopefully this will continue to show you how that pattern works. Excuse me. So we're going to start with a chain one, just as before. Now I realize I got to pull up a little bit more yarn for this round. There we go. So you'll remember in round 3, we did 1, then 2, 1, then 2, 1, then 2. Now we're going to do 2, a half double crochet in 2 stitches, then an increase, then 2 in the next. We're spreading out those increases, so we're still only increasing by 9 stitches this round. So let's go ahead and start that together here. We'll actually go all the way through it together. We half double crochet right in that first stitch. There we are. And of course, it's first stitch of the round, so we want to move that stitch marker right on up. There we go. And then, so that's 1, and then 1 in the next. And then we work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. 1 and 2. But now we need 2 by themselves. So 1, it's kind of hard to say this round. 1, and then 1, and then 2 in the same stitch. We want to have 2 sort of single half double crochets in between our half double crochet increases. Now, another thing about flat circles is right now, you can see, it's still got a really beautiful round shape. But if we were to keep going with this, 30, 40 rounds, probably not even that many once we got to 7 or 8, you would probably notice that where those increases are, it's starting to make almost, a hexagon or an octagon again, depending on what number of stitches you started with. It'll start almost making straight sides. So you'll sometimes see in patterns where, and I do it myself, and it's always a good idea, if you really want to keep that really round shape, you'll actually shift those increases a little bit. It's the same number of increases, but maybe you'll put the increase at the beginning of the repeat rather than at the end, or once it gets really big in the middle of the repeat rather than like at the beginning or the end, just so that they don't all stack up on top of each other. But with the smaller sizes, it isn't so much of an issue. It's mainly once you start getting, really several rows into it that you start seeing those straight sides pop up for you. But by moving those increases around a little bit, which you'll see quite often, for example, in the squishes, even though we're working in a spiral, we still need to move those increases around so that we keep from creating those straight sides. So, alrighty, let's see, we've got 2, so we need 1 and 1. And then 2 again. 1 and 2. And then 1 and 1. That's kind of how I tend to think of it in my head. And in fact, when I'm jotting down the crochet pattern, on my notes before I actually type it up, my notes don't look a whole lot like all these, words you see right here. My notes when I'm working in flat circles will be something like, 1, 2, or 1, 1, 2, or then 1, 1, 1, 2 as we keep going. And then when I know I need to move it, I will be like 1, 1, 2, 1, 1. So we're still doing the same number of increases. We just need to move it around a little bit to prevent creating those sides. You can almost see them in this one. Almost starting to come in a little bit there, but it's not too bad yet. A little bit more yarn here. We're almost all the way around round 4. Again, we're increasing by 9 stitches per round, so at the end of this round, we should have a total of 36. 9, 18, 27, 36. Excuse me. So got my increase here, and then 1, and 1. If you wanted to make the next size up, there would be another round of increases, and it would be half double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and then an increase. So we're just keep spreading out those increases. Let's see, I have to go back and look. Where was my increase? There it is. So it's time for another 2 and 1. 1 and 2. And then 1 and 1. And we know we ended up in the right spot here. End of our repeat. We've got 2 stitches in the next stitch, and it's our marked stitch for our last stitch of the round. So 1 and 2. And now, since that was my last stitch, I will go ahead and move that stitch marker right on up. There we go. A lot of people like to use single crochet for projects like this, and I do too, depending on the project. And amigurumi is often made with single crochet, but you'll notice my squishes and a lot of my projects, I like to use half double crochet. I think it's got just about as much, solidity to it. It's really nice and full stitch, but, it isn't leggy like a half double crochet, but it's a little bit faster than a single crochet. I think it adds a really nice bit of texture to the stitch itself. So there we are. We've got our slip stitch, and there's the bottom of our bowl. Bernat blanket always likes a little bit of, I call it hand blocking, which I guess all blocking is really done by hand, so that's a strange name for it. But I will literally, rather than getting it wet, I find if you just give it a good tug, kind of pull it into place, straighten out those stitches, boom. We've got a beautifully flat circle for the bottom of our basket. So now we have round 5. Let me change the page here on my PDF that I'm following along with. And now this is where we have our only turn. More often than not, when you're working in the round, you don't have a lot of turns in it. Again, depends on the project, but you'll just keep going the same direction. That does mean that the seam tends to slant a little bit. So a way to get that seam to not slant on you is to put in a turn. For this project, that isn't so important. For this project, we're turning for a different reason. We're going to turn so that this doesn't become the bottom of our basket. If we just kept going without turning, then this would be the inside of our basket right here. We'd see that tail end and we'd see the backs of our stitches. I think this side's a little prettier. And when I look inside my basket from above, this is the side I want to see. But I also want this to be the right side. So by doing this turn, we're able to get a right side here and then the right side on the outside of our basket. So for round 5, excuse me, this is going to be our only turn. Now I like to chain 1 before I turn, but you can turn and chain 1, whatever you prefer. So now we're going to be working from what looks like the wrong side, but it's the bottom of the basket's here. Now we're going to be on the outside of the basket, building up those sides. So after we chain 1, we want to work a single crochet in the back loop only of every stitch around. And this is another spot where you can see it's so handy to have that stitch marker. Because from this side, sure, it's easy enough to see that that's the slip stitch. But once we turn, it gets a little confusing, right? It'd be really tempting to put that first stitch here. But we got to remember that's the slip stitch. We want to come all the way over to this marked stitch. And we're going to go under just the back loop only. So I'm going to go ahead and take this stitch marker out of the way now that we know what stitch we're going into. And I want to put my hook, let me see, oops, if I can get that just a little bit closer here to the camera. We want to put our hook under just that back loop only. So I'm going to put my hook right in the middle of that stitch so that just the back loop of it is all on top of my hook. Still coming from the same direction. I'm not coming from behind or anything, but I want just the back loop of that top V of the stitch to be on my hook. Then I make my single crochet, and now I'll go ahead and mark, try to pull that tail through. Now we'll go ahead and mark that as our first stitch here of this round. Now, why are we working in the back loop only? This is another favorite trick of mine when I'm making a basket or, well, baskets, containers, anything I really want to have a sharp turn to the sides. I want it to be this way and then a 90-degree angle. Working in the back loop only in this sort of project really pushes the stitches back. So it's really going to help give us that really defined shape. So it doesn't just kind of look like a gentle bowl, which is also lovely and has its, purposes. But for this particular pattern, I really wanted a really nice, sharp 90-degree angle on those sides. Helps it sit a little flatter, I think, and just makes it look, a little different, gives it its own look. So you can see here, I'm just going right in the center of that V at the top of each stitch so I can catch just that back loop right there. Alrighty. And we're just going to single crochet in each stitch around for this round. So we've got 36 stitches in this round because we're not increasing anymore. We're just going to work a single crochet in each stitch. So from here, for the small size, every round will only have 36 stitches in it. If you make the medium bowl, we would have had another round of increases. So we would have gone up by another 9 stitches, which would have been 45. So, but then we would have just had 45 stitches in our, sides here. So however many stitches you end up with there, just follow your instructions. Sometimes in some of the sizes, I did have to add an extra stitch in there, just kind of squeeze one in so that we had the right number for the pattern of the texture on the sides of the bowl. So you'll want to look at those different sizes. We want to have an even number when it comes time to make the sides here, but we just single crochet in that back loop all around. You can already see most of the way around, a little over half now. You see that 90-degree angle, how that just stands right up from the side, or from the bottom rather, stands up on the side from the bottom, however you want to put it, but it's standing up beautifully, nice and tall. That's due to working in that back loop only, in combination with using a hook that creates a really tight fabric. This is the same size hook and yarn that I used to create a recent bag, oh gosh, what did I call it? The chunky blanket bag. Had to think about it for a minute. The chunky blanket bag I did using this yarn and hook as well. And it created a really nice firm fabric that you absolutely could line for a bag if you wanted to, but then you don't have to. So obviously, depending on what you're storing it, if you're putting your knitting needles in it, you might need a liner, but for just about anything else, it should be just fine. Alrighty, so we can crochet on around. Let's see. All right. Oh, thank you so much, you guys. Great comments. Thank you. I'm glad you guys are trying the patterns. Yeah, yarn size can make a big difference on what size, thing you end up with. If you needed a tiny set of bowls, absolutely make this in a thinner yarn. Peyton's Grace would be beautiful for tiny, cute little bowls. Just adjust your hook size accordingly. So we've come to that last stitch. I know because I've got my stitch marker there. I am going to go ahead and pull it out because getting under just that back loop within there is kind of a difficult proposition. So we'll get in there. Excuse me. There we go. All righty. So now I want to go ahead and mark that last stitch here of the round. And then again, we want to join with a slip stitch. Don't want to work this one in a spiral because I want my top, final edge to be really nice and smooth. So there we go. And that is what it should look like at the end of round 5. And you can see it really has really great side definition right there. Really nice 90-degree angle. So now for the small size, we just do 2 more rounds. For the larger sizes, it's 1 more per size, 3 rounds for medium, 4 rounds for large, etc. But these are the rounds that are going to give us our texture along the side. You can see right here in the white, just a little bit more interesting and a little more fun to crochet, as well. So we start again with a chain 1. There we go. And then we're going to work a single crochet and a double crochet in that first stitch. So we'll go ahead and move our stitch marker out of the way. Single crochet is first, so we'll mark that. Let's see, and then a double crochet in the same stitch. And then we skip the next stitch because we don't want to increase, and we're working 2 stitches here. We don't want to add any stitches, so we're going to need to skip the next one. Then we do it again. Single crochet and double crochet in the next. And then skip the one after that. Then single crochet. Oop, pull that loop through would be helpful. Double crochet in the same one. Skip the next one. It's one of my favorite stitch patterns. I'm working on a sweater with it right now, and I've used it a lot recently. Just kind of came back into my head, and I'm really enjoying the little bit of extra texture and interest that it adds. We just want to make sure to always skip one in between those 2 so that we don't accidentally end up increasing. So Dragonfly asks, with a 4-weight yarn, what hook size would you recommend? 4 is an interesting question, and I'm glad you asked. The 4-weight yarn, I think, has one of the biggest ranges of yarns, or sizes, I should say, because it is so popular. You've got a lot of thin fours, you've got thick fours. Karen Simply Soft would be a great example of a thinner four. Whereas, for instance, Red Heart with Love is definitely one of the thicker fours. So for those, and really for any of them, I recommend you start out by looking at the hook size recommended on the label. And then if you've been crocheting for a while, you might know, I'm typically a tight crocheter or I'm typically a loose crocheter, and that will inform your decision if you need to go up or down a size. For Bernat Blanket, this one does recommend an 8mm crochet hook, and I crochet with it often enough to know that this is going to give me a pretty tight fabric. And I can also, kind of keep in mind that I want to work these stitches, there it goes, that I want to work these stitches just a little bit tighter, and I'm not trying to keep it real loose. So if you really are worried about creating a stiff fabric, if you tend to work your stitches a little loosely, then I would go down a hook size from whatever is recommended on the label. So you're going to get a little bit of a range. Typically an H or a 5mm creates a really nice sort of stiffer fabric with a worsted weight yarn for me. But then again, like I said, I know a few designers who crochet so loosely, they actually have to recommend a hook size too off from what they're actually using because they know their stitches are not, a standard gauge. So really, this is the kind of project where it's just about getting a nice firm fabric. So if you take, make the first round and you're like, ooh, this is really loose and floppy, then go ahead and pull it out and try a smaller size hook. If you're having a lot of struggle pulling the stitches through, then you're probably going to need to go up a size. But for whatever yarn you're using, I would start out by looking at the label and then use your knowledge of where your personal tension usually tends to be. Alrighty, so we're working our way around here. Now, because our repeat here for rounds 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, depending on what size you're making here, because the part of the repeat is we work 2 stitches in one stitch and then skip the next, we're going to end up skipping that last stitch. So that will be a good sort of visual indicator to help you as you come around to make sure you haven't accidentally not skipped a stitch or skipped 2 of them or something. I always like having those stitch markers just to let me know I'm in the right spot, and I can see now that I am. When I skip the next stitch, I'm going to work 2 stitches in here and then skip that marked stitch. So single crochet followed by a double crochet. And then we skip that last stitch. This is our last stitch, so we're going to go ahead and move this one on up to our new last stitch. Should be a double crochet. And then we can just join with our slip stitch right there. Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. This is just a little bit of actually Bernat Blanket Ogo that I had left over from another project here, but any of the Bernat blankets would do. This is a really lovely one, though. I think the colorway for this one was called Biscotti or something like that. All right, so that was round 6, and you can see a little bit of more extra interest and texture there, and it still stands up really beautifully there. There we go. Nice high sides on there, and of course, in the pattern, I only add one more, but you could add more or stop here if you want it a little bit shorter. You can add more, rounds and rows, or just rounds, I suppose. You could add more rounds, but if you do that, it might start to become floppy. But you can, just put it down every round. See, right now, it's still nice and stiff. And of course, if you're going to fill it up with something like yarn, or something that's going to fill it out, then you can kind of keep going as high as you'd like, and the things inside will help keep those sides straight as well. So round 7 is the last round here for our smaller size, and it's exactly the same as round 6. We chain 1, we go right into that first stitch with a single crochet. Want to move that stitch marker on up for the last time here. There we go. And then, of course, put a double crochet right back in that same exact stitch. There we are. Then we skip the next one and go to the next one. Then we do it again. Single crochet and double crochet in the same stitch. And then skip the next one. I have seen this stitch pattern called so many different things over the years. Just a variety of names. I don't know, beyond the actual stitches themselves, there aren't a whole lot of official stitch pattern names over the years. They tend to change and alter. What's known today as Tunisian crochet used to be just called Afghan crochet. And I think because of the blanket, not because of the country. But it's the same techniques over the years. They get different names. But this is a really nice, simple stitch pattern that, like I say, adds just a lovely little bit of texture, but just uses some basic stitches, perfect for beginners and experienced crocheters alike. Have single crochet, double crochet in the same, skip the next. That's all we're doing all the way around. We want to make sure to skip that one though, so we don't accidentally add increases, or we're going to have a bowl that continues to get wider, and we want to keep our sides, for this one at least, nice and straight. So Kaylee asks, if you have to wash it in the washing machine, will it lose its rigidity? It should not. I would let it air dry just in case. The washing machine shouldn't do anything to it. The instructions for washing Bernat blanket are on here. Machine washable and dryable. And then in other languages, it has the little symbols. So you can wash and dry this one, but for something where you want it to stay stiff, I would probably avoid using the dryer just because, heat can relax acrylic a little bit. But washing it should be fine. I would wash it on cold, again, rather than hot. Soaking anything plastic in hot water eventually will soften it up. And ultimately, that's what acrylic yarn is. So, polyester. This one's polyester. So you could dry it. I haven't dried these myself. I prefer to just, let them air dry. And I also think it just extends the life of your project. The clothes we buy at the store, same thing. If we hung them up to dry, they'd probably last longer. But the things we make have a little bit more time and effort put into them. So I like to put a little more time and effort into the care, but definitely throw it in the washing machine. Just let it air dry, sort of reshape and air dry, and it should be good to go. So we're just working our way around here on our last round for our small size bowl. Like I say, again, if you wanted to add a couple more rounds, make it a little bit taller for whatever your purposes are, whatever you need to store, that works just fine too. I went on the largest size that I made, I went up to, would have been 8, 9, 10, 11, 4 rounds on the sides. So, and it still stood up really nice and stiff. So I think you could probably keep going for at least a few more. Alrighty, there we go. Almost all the way around here for our last round. And then the final bit that we'll do on this pattern is my seamless join. Not just mine, it's everybody's, but it's a fantastic technique. Very first tutorial video I ever made was for the seamless join. And it is just something ever since I learned it, it's how I close off most of my projects that are made in the round. So here we are, our last round. Again, you could keep going if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and end here. We're going to skip that last stitch just like we did in the previous round, but now we can go ahead and just pull these stitch markers out of our way. We've made our last stitch. So now what we need to do is join like we like we do at the end of most rounds. We want to join the first stitch and the last stitch, but I'm not going to join with a slip stitch here, because when you join with a slip stitch and then pull that end through and then weave in your ends, afraid this is going to roll away. Let me put it over here. It does tend to create a little bit of a lump there, right? Just a little bit of a lump from that knot. And, maybe as crocheters, we're the only people who are going to notice that, but we're going to notice it and it's going to bother us. At least it bothers me. So I like to do something a little bit different. I went ahead and cut my yarn. Now, rather than pulling that end through or slip stitching, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on that loop so that now you can see the end of that yarn is coming out from the middle in the center of that V of that last stitch we made. And now I'll take my yarn needle here. Gonna need a big one for this yarn, so I always have a few in different sizes. Squeeze that on there. And now what we're going to do is that seamless join. Now, if this was a motif, if I was making a granny square or something like that, where I needed to maintain a particular stitch count in this final round so that I could join it to other things, then I would do it in the second stitch. For a project like this, where we're on our final round, I'm not going to be joining it to anything. I don't need a particular set number of stitches to work into anymore, or, to attach to something else. Then I'll just go ahead and do it to the first stitch. The technique is the same. We take our yarn needle, find the stitch that we want to attach to, and just go right under those top 2 loops, just as if we were using our hook. Same spot, right under those top 2 loops of the stitch. Then we pull that yarn on through. And because I'm not trying to create a false stitch here, I can go ahead and just pull that really nice and tight. And then I just send that needle right back down into the center of that stitch it came out of, and you can see that creates a really nice smooth line there. I do want to show you, just in case it is important to you for some reason, if you wanted to maybe add another section of color, Maybe you want to bring in, you know, some stripes or something, but you want to have a really nice finish with one color before you join that next color. Then instead, what you're going to want to do, get this back on my needle here, is, as I say, join to that second stitch. Let me show you that technique now. So there's that first stitch. Here's the second one. Same thing. We're going to go under it from the front, just like we would with a hook. Pull it up and through, but now instead of pulling it tight, I want to create a loop with this yarn that goes right over the V of that first stitch and sort of mimics it right on top. So I'm going to really gently pull. I just want that to lay right up next to it there. And you can see now that loop I'm pulling, you can see that hopefully move there a little bit. I can pull it back and forth. I want that loop to be the same size as the other stitches. When I feel like it's pretty close there, then same thing. I go right back down to the center of that stitch I came out of, that last stitch of the round, and then I can just pull that down and through. Now I can adjust from here and say, okay, that looks pretty good. Looks like all the other stitches from the top, you can't really tell that this was a sewn join. But one more thing, because it does leave a little bit of a hole right there, I like to then go under the top two loops of that stitch we skipped right over the top of. Just like so. And then weave in that end. Let me get that a little tug there. And you can see now from the top, we don't have that weird little join. We're not going to see, it's not going to be obvious where we finished off this round. And of course then you can weave in these ends as normal. Let me just tuck this one out of the way here. But you can see now we've got that right side that was facing up is on the bottom of our bowl. You're not going to see the wrong side when you're looking down into the bowl from above. And we've got our final end there to weave in from the bottom. But that is it. Like I say, to make the bigger sizes, we just have another round of increases and then maybe another round to build up the sides too, if you prefer. And then make bigger sizes, we just increase another round before we start building up those sides. So it is a really simple bowl set. You can see right here again how those sizes sort of end up. You know, if you do use different yarns, obviously you're going to get different sized bowls than I came up with right here. But it is just a really fun pattern that you can make up. Like I say, it's great for gifting. It's great for home organization. I keep so many of these around for things like scissors and stuff like that. They're just really handy. So we can go ahead and I think come back to the other camera. Let's see. Kaylee asks, do you have a Facebook group that we can ask for help to? Yes, absolutely. I have the Facebook page, of course, Moogly. It's just Moogly, I think, called the Facebook page. But the Moogly community group is also on Facebook. And you can ask questions in there. There's lots of people crocheting along in there. And then, of course, you can always contact me. I've got a contact button on the blog, mooglyblog.com, where you will find the free written pattern for the Bird's Nest Bowl set. Definitely want to check that out. There should be a link in the description. If you want to click in there, it'll take you right to the blog. And like I say, I always love to answer questions. You can drop a question here or on the blog itself, on the pattern, or hit the contact button and send me a message. I would love to answer your questions if you have any other ones. So thank you all so much for joining me today. I do want to encourage you to check out Crochet with Moogly on Made It Myself TV, which is a free streaming channel that you can download on your smart TV. And it's also an app that you can download on your phone, full of great crafty content, not just mine, but there's woodworking, there's knitting, there's sewing, there's embroidery, there's cooking, there's gardening, perfect this time of year, right? So definitely check that out. It's brand new, it's free. On, like I say, your smart TVs, Made It Myself TV. I've got my own TV show on there. We're going to be turning it into a real show here as we go, as we get started. So I'm very excited about that. So if you enjoyed crocheting along with me today, I hope you'll check that out. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you all again soon. And again, have a wonderful day, everybody. Be sure to check out mooglyblog.com as well. Thanks. Bye-bye.